Welcome to How I Killed My Mother. And I have been telling you a few short stories. And it was really just to warm me up to see how I was recording, what I was doing, and how this podcast was going to go along. And the main story is about my mother and myself. And without further ado, let's get into that. Thanks for listening. I'm here to tell you that for the next few episodes, I'm going to get into the whole mom of it all. Greetings, dear listeners, and buckle up as I dive into the familiar circus that stars me, the perennial ringmaster of mischief, and my illustrious supporting cast. Mom, the steel magnolia with a penchant for dramatic rule enforcement, and my brother Jess, the bubble boy who wasn't. This is my segment of my podcast where I'm delving into my mother issues. The topic you came to hear, the why and the how I killed my mother. We're on our way. I'll start by telling you probably again that my mother and I were very, very, very close. We were alike. We were both strong-willed and calculating, and we respected each other's strengths, our uncanny abilities to push each other's buttons where no one else could. I believe my brother and my father might say that my mom loved me more than my brother because of the way we hung out, my mom and I. We enjoyed the same films, we did board games together, we cooked together. And I will agree that mom did not love me and my brother equally, but that's because I know she loved my brother Jess more than me. And I wouldn't have changed that because he needed more love. I did not. My brother and I were very different. My brother came along 4 years after me, and he was born with food allergies, which spanned from normal foods like milk, cheese, and chocolate, as well as an array of regular fruits and vegetables and grains. He could only eat the tip of the 1960s and 70s food pyramid and could have been the poster child of things you cannot eat. For Jess to eat the things on his long list of what not to put in his mouth would bring on attacks to his body, such as rashes and fatigue and an inability to breathe. And, Jess was asthmatic too, and sensitive to smog, dust, and pollen, and loads of outdoor plants. Additionally, he was also allergic to cat dander and too much dog hair. And our family lived in a canyon in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains in California, 30 minutes away from downtown smoggy LA, and our house was surrounded by pollinating trees and brush. We had an indoor-outdoor dog, and he carried in the outdoors. We also had a mostly outdoor cat and a pet squirrel, as well as a family of raccoons who would occasionally break into the kitchen through the screen door to get to the pantry to get their graham crackers, which were placed on a special shelf just for them. It seemed like everything was out to get my brother, so he should have been a bubble boy. But my mom wouldn't have it. No. She worked very hard to not let my brother feel left out, whether it be at a neighborhood kids party where she had to pre-bake his own special foods, or during our own family dinners where she had to leave out ingredients for his own portions. And mom compensated so that his milkless morning cereals and his chocolateless treats and his tomatoless spaghetti looked and tasted nearly as appetizing and tasted as good as what everyone else around him was having. And whenever my little brother's boy brain did compel him to sneak a normal human food into his mouth, it always begot rashes, near asphyxiation, anaphylactic shock, and tears. So mom would be right there with him with steam and baths and lotions and spontaneous trips to the doctors, along with extra hugs and extra love. I had natural chutzpah, I think. I'm not bragging. I just think that it was a gift, like a good head of hair or a large penis. But my mom appreciated my gift because she had chutzpah too. Chutzpah to me meant that you were given the gift of not worrying about what others think or feel when you go after what you want. And when you do get what you want, everyone you use to get it still loves you and adores you. That's a gift, right? And I know this sounds like a sociopath, but a sociopath doesn't care if people they use to get things still like them or love them. So you see the difference, see? Even starting in kindergarten, I began knocking on neighbors' doors, people I'd never met, and I'd ask them if they had any candy. Little me could have been a mile or two away from my house, and then one of those neighbors would probably call my mother. All of those neighbors thought I was adorable, and I loved them back, and then continued to hit them up if they were not the ones that called my mother. In 3rd grade, I convinced my neighborhood kids to switch to rock fights instead of avocado fights in the orchards by our house because the overripe tomatoes that I found on the ground were too squishy. And that was so stupid, right? But anyway, I was such a good ducker and a liar with a very sweet reputation that when several of the kids had to have stitches, all the other parents believed me. But Mom didn't believe me, and yet she couldn't do anything about it or punish me. Did I resent the extra love my mom gave to my brother? No way. Because while my mom was constantly having to nurse, resuscitate, cook for, steam, or transport my sickly brother to the emergency room, I was dodging responsibilities and embracing chaos with the kind of enthusiasm of a soul-collecting demon at a serial killer convention. My mother's attention on my brother meant that I could be the Houdini of mischief, and my gifts of duplicity and chutzpah allowed me to almost never be convicted of naughtiness. At the age of 8, me and a boyfriend, Chris, blew up a goody two-shoes Mormon kid's mailbox who lived down the street. That mailbox had a wooden cutout of Snoopy laying on the top of it. It deserved to die, right? In the middle of a summer day, Chris and I lit the fuse of an M80 and threw it into that Snoopy doghouse mailbox. And then we ran. The bang was so loud, it echoed all the way up the canyon so that I knew that my mom would have heard it, and that was about 1/8 of a mile away up a hill past our private driveway. Therefore, Chris and I stood a big chance of getting caught if I didn't act quickly. So I ran home and told my mom what happened. Well, my reimagined version of the incident, which converted me and Chris to be the victims as opposed to the malevolent mailbox renovationists. Unfortunately, by the time I got home, Mom had just gotten off the phone to one of our old lady neighbors. That old lady neighbor heard the explosion, which prompted her to stick her nosy fucking face out her window. To stick her nosy wrinkled face out her window to spy on Chris and me running away, just as a charred Snoopy and pieces of flaming mailbox fell down to earth from the sky. "You blew up the Jacobsons' mailbox," Mom accused me. "No, of course not," I told her. "How could she accuse me of such a thing?" I said. Then I told Mom what nosy old lady neighbor must have really seen. In my story, I was fending for myself as best I could in the wilds of suburban danger, armed with nothing but my wits and a profound sense of justice that bordered on self-endangerment. You see, I told my mom that the evil neighborhood bullies blew up Jacobson's mailbox, but not before me and my friend Chris bravely tried to stop them with our words of protest. Yet they still put that M80 in Jacobson's Snoopy mailbox, and then they lit the fuse. After they blew it up, I told her, those guys chased us down the street. I am positive that was what the neighbor lady must have seen. Then I begged my mother not to say anything to those guys' mothers because it would have been obvious to them that it was me and Chris who ratted them out. Then they'd, of course, retaliate and beat us up. But hey, Mom, I finished with, you do what you think is best. If I survive the beating, it's only your hospital bill. You know, I almost pointed out the time I was running in my elementary school gym to beat my friend Jenny to the lunch line, and she pushed me like I had done to her so many times before. So I slid into the wall and barely tapped my left wrist on the wall. It was a fracture, and when I told my mom after I got home from school that day, she didn't believe me because I didn't cry or go to the nurse or interrupt any of my normal routine that day. After a week of me telling my mom that my wrist was fractured, she relented and took me to the doctor, who x-rayed my wrist and confirmed that I had indeed a fractured wrist, and then he proceeded to put my wrist in a cast. That mom guilt was a godsend for this bad boy because I brought up that incident anytime I decided I wanted to stay home from school with a cold, a flu, or a body ache of any kind. But that wrist leverage story wouldn't have helped anyway when I blew up the mailbox, because this was not the first time I had told a tale, tried to trick, or tested the limits of my mom's parental patience. Mom had had it with me that day, and she didn't believe me. So she told me to go to my room and stay there until my dad got home. But instead of me staying in my room, I snuck out and I ran to my friend Chris's house and told him exactly the whole bullshit story I made up and I gave it to my mom. And then I made him visualize it and memorize it and believe it. Then I ordered him to tell his mom the exact same story. Then I ran back home and I waited. When my dad came home from work that evening, Mom and Dad came into my room and they started to have a powwow with me. But I was a fast talker and I reiterated my story and I challenged my mom to call Chris. He'd collaborate my story, I told them. So of course my mom was obligated to call Chris's mom. After that call, my mom was exasperated, defeated, and possibly a little embarrassed in front of her husband. I could tell Mom was miffed when she apologized to me and then told me that she would indeed keep mum about the bullies blowing up the Jacobsons' mailbox. Then she called that old lady and explained to her that it was the bad boys down the street that desecrated the mailbox. As I listened in, I heard Mom also advise the old lady not to get involved with the bullies or her own mailbox might get blown up. Hey, I know you thought this episode was going to be about my mother, which would then lead to this story about how I killed my mother. And it is, but you have to understand that to know my mother, to really know her, you have to know her upbringing to understand why I killed my mother. I wasn't there when my mom was a girl growing up with 12 living siblings, and I certainly wasn't alive before she married my dad. I came 9 months later. But I can tell you what made my mom who she was by telling you her adult upbringing, which led her wanting to die when I helped her with her wish. So let me continue. One time I wanted to buy a model car kit, and the place I wanted to buy my most current want was located only 2 miles away on Glendora Avenue at a locally owned 5 and dime store called Box. It might as well have been across the Sahara for how much I avoided riding my bike or rode my skateboard like my other little friends did. So I called a cab company and told them to have the driver meet me at the bottom of our driveway because I suspected that my mom would have told me to ride my bike. The cab dropped me off at Box and I bought my model kit. I think it was like a 57 Chevy black, complete with flame decals. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to call my mom. So I found the payphone, which was located by the greeting cards area of the store. I decided to call my mom because, not out of guilt, but to inquire if there was anything she needed me to pick up for her while I was downtown. You know, like a grown-up. Now, I was only 9 at this time, but on weekends, I would work at my dad's Shell gas station. In the days where gas stations were where you got your cars repaired before the dealerships got wise and began to work on their own cars as well. At first, I only cleaned the tools and the bathrooms and the fuel pumps. But like any prodigy, I quickly graduated to pumping gas, checking oil, and artfully using a squeegee on windshields while I perched atop a plastic block that barely made me tall enough to see over the hoods. So 9 years old, I had my own income from a job that had me smelling like gasoline and success. And in my mind, I should have had every freedom and option to do what I wanted to do like any other person with a job. Hi, Mom, I said from the payphone located in the greeting card area of Box. Hi, honey. Why are you calling me on the phone? She sounded confused. Mom, I wanted to see if you wanted me to pick up anything from the store. I'm at Box. You are? You're silly. Where are you? Are you in the living room? No, I'm at Box. I took a cab. I needed to buy a model. It's one I really wanted. Jon-David, you took a cab? You could have been kidnapped or murdered. But I didn't take a cab to a kidnapper's or a murderer's house, I told her. I went to Box. I can pick up some stuff for dinner if you want. Finkbinder's Market is just up the street. But Mom didn't want me to pick up anything for dinner, and she didn't want anything from Box. And she didn't want me to take a cab home. In fact, she told me I had to walk home. As a child, I never could understand why my mom couldn't understand how adult and practical I was for my young age. Well, of course, I called the same cab company and had them pick me up downtown Glendora and take me home, but not before I strode up and down the street some more, window shopping. To take up some time so Mom would have thought that I had walked the whole way home. Once again, Mom summoned Dad home early from his work, and he was there by the time I got home. And once again, they began to lecture me about how kids don't take cabs, only to be interrupted by my thought-out rebuttal that Buffy and Jody took cabs by themselves on TV, the show Family Affair, and that was in a big city where there actually were kidnappers and murderers. So what was the fucking big deal? I didn't say fucking. Well, kids don't take cabs in Glendora, my mom said, even if they have their own money to pay for them. That's all my mom could think to say, which really did not convince me that what I was doing was wrong. So I still took cabs lots of times after that. The way I saw it was that if I got good grades, I went to work at my dad's gas station on the weekends, and I got my chores done at home, well, then I expected there to be recompenses and freedoms awarded to me. My best lies always came from not just saying anything. Forget making up a story, just omit. That was best. And always answer a question with a question. I learned the best ways lying from my mother. If she threw away something of my dad's, like an old favorite shirt or a power tool with a worn plug wire, or if she moved one of his projects out of her way, she would just say, I don't know where it is, or maybe you could have moved it yourself and forgot. Both were not lies. And she didn't know where the shirt was or where the thrown away power tool was. It was at the dump or on the way to the dump, and the exact location was something she didn't know. And maybe he could have moved the project himself and forgot. It always threw him, and I thought that was brilliant. Gaslighting. My mother was a master. So if I stole candy from a grocery store, which was often when I was a child, I told no one. I never boasted, flaunted, or shared my wins, lest I be asked things like where I got the largest sized Abba Zaba. My brother would buckle and confess under pressure if he ever did anything bad, and my dad would certainly never do bad things. Come to think of it, my whole family, including my mother, was definitely sweeter than me. Frankly, I have always thought of myself kind of like a bird hatched out of an egg that was dropped into my family's nest by a cuckoo bird. The cuckoo bird, if you didn't know, is what is called a brood parasite. The mother cuckoo lays its eggs in other birds' nests, so they don't have to feed and raise their own young. The baby cuckoo bird is then raised along their host's chicks. In some cases, hatched cuckoos may push out the unwitting host's eggs to get all the worms and usurp all the host's maternal attention. I know what you're thinking. My poor family. I admit, sometimes I took things too far. And here comes another story. I'm sorry, I'll get to my mom's stuff soon. So I remember once I refused to eat the lima beans on my plate at dinner time. This is a mom story still, but moving on. For no particular reason, I did not want those lima beans. My dad said that it would be okay if I didn't eat them, but my mom asked me to just try a few of them, and I refused to put one lima bean in my mouth. So she threatened to serve me those same lima beans, unrewarmed and nothing else, every night until I ate them all. I can't remember all the little things or big things that I must have done that week or that month or that year to exhaust my mother's patience with me at that particular time. But I'm sure she was once again trying to wrestle from me the steering wheel of our constant power struggle to lead me towards the path of being a better boy. On the fourth night that Mom placed those soggy lima beans on my plate, my dad was at his wit's end. He didn't like it when my mom and I fought, and he just wanted the feud to be over. My brother was always scared and unsettled when I became obstinate, especially if it led to me and my mom arguing. So my dad wanted that over too for him. But the conflict between me and my mom over my lima bean refusal created an even worse and dramatic fight between my parents. Dad: "Just let him skip the lima beans. He's never going to eat them. They are going to get mushy. He doesn't like them." Mom: "It's not about the lima beans. He's manipulating us." Dad: "What is it with you two? You're always fighting. You're alike, you know." Mom: "At least I can stand up to him." My brother: "Well, you're going to get a divorce." I'm not proud to say it, but at the dinner table that night, as my parents exchanged angry interpretations of what was going on and infuriation-fueled jabs at each other, I felt a rush. Over just 4 family dinner nights, I had done this. I had ignited a family brawl, the likes of which I had never experienced before. My 3 family members were so upset, and yet my soul was recharged. Again, I wasn't a sociopath. At the very most, I was just an overly creative child who may have been a bit of a mayhem vampire. The lesson here was that I learned that I had a strong will and that I could actually build something tangible. In this case, a division, a rift. And I found out that I could stave off hunger. Hey, I was a child. I was learning the ways of living in the world, even if maybe that wasn't the way to do it. So you learn, what not to do too, right? That 4-night lima bean standoff was a big win for me. I got my parents to fight in front of me, and that was power. Although that was the last time they broke in front of me. After that night, they always took the how we were going to handle Jon-David discussions on the aside, and then they'd come back at me with a united front. So it all came back to bite me in the ass for the remainder of the time that I lived with my parents. I got away with less and less as I grew up under their roof, and by the way, I like lima beans just fine. I always have. So by the time I was a teenager, as his doctors predicted, my brother had outgrown many of his allergy symptoms, so he became a little bit more independent. And I had grown up enough to seemingly follow my mom's household rules, which also significantly reduced the pressures of being our mother and the chaos that was our home because of me. Also, I had outgrown a momentarily too skinny and insecure phase in junior high. So by the time I reached high school, I was somewhat handsome and passably popular. And because I was on the older side of my grade, I had my own car almost a year before the kids my same age. I was still working at my dad's 2 gas stations, and I began to manage the payroll and purchasing and scheduling, so that meant more responsibility, which begot more money. I was in the band, and I played piccolo and flute, and I ran with the cross-country team. In my spare time, I made extra money manufacturing fake IDs for other teens, not just in my high school, but other high schools, and I snuck out every Saturday night around midnight to drive down to West Hollywood to hang out with the village people at a gay club called Studio One. But I was never caught, so it was around this time when my mom began to enjoy her motherhood, and me a little bit more. Mom and I had already spent a lot of time together when I was in grade school in the 70s. At that time, there were lots of movies about telekinesis and UFOs and psychic phenomenon, and movies like Carrie, Brainstorm, and The Fury made the general population ponder if we humans could learn how to move objects with our thoughts or read minds. And Mom and I liked the thought that normal people like us could be special. When I was a kid, Mom bought us a deck of cards that contained wavy lines and circles and squares and triangles on them and stars. We spent hours guessing what the other was holding up, and we became quite good at it. Much better than chance or average. But she was the only one with the big ESP talent, to tell you the truth. I don't think it was me at all. Mom and her sisters were super psychic, especially with each other. Each one always knew when the other one was going to call, and they'd talk about seeing people who had passed. Mom truly was special. So when I was in high school, Mom and I really enjoyed each other in a more adult way because I was becoming more of an adult. We went to movies together, we cooked together, and I helped Mom entertain family and friends who visit us in the summers by cooking and cleaning and serving drinks. All things I learned from her and my two grandmothers. And I was a great co-host with my mom, I think. And whenever we drove up to Northern California to visit family for the holidays, it was always me and Mom, the pair of us, helping my Aunt Dee or one of my grandmothers in their kitchens. Mom and I fit so well together. And my mom and I talked about marriage, my dad, my brother, ghosts, animals, race, religion, and psychics. I began to mature enough to share with her my future hopes and dreams, and I told my mom that I thought I wanted to live in New York City and be an airline pilot and travel around the world. And Mom also shared her hopes and dreams for my future, and they included me having a wife and children. I told my mom that I wanted children, and that was the truth. But I was also mature enough and wise enough not to tell her that I was never going to have a wife. I intuitively did not want to tell my mom that I was gay because Mom had always had a strong vision of how her family should be and turn out to be, especially me. Even through my bad kid years, she held that vision. She always told me that I would end up, after I grew out of my mischievous ways, that her vision of me was like Carol Brady family on the TV show, The Brady Bunch. Only with 2 boys instead of 3 boys or 3 girls, which was way too big and too much like her own upbringing. Yeah, I knew my mom's hopes for me for getting married and then having perfect children was one day going to have to crash into the reality of disappointment. But Mom used to garner so much pleasure saying things like, "You're going to have an obstinate, evil child of your own one day, and then you'll wish you were nicer to your mother." My perfect children in her mind would have been twice as strong-willed and obstinate as I was. She wished for me to receive my own comeuppance for my own extremely spoiled upbringing. She really wanted that for me. And I wanted that for her too. But I knew I couldn't give her the whole picture. To make sure that my mother did not find out I was gay, as well as to become more popular, I dated girls in high school. At first, I'd be boyfriend-girlfriend with a young lady whom I had socially ranked at like a 5. Then I'd break up with her once I caught the attention and secured a future boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with a girl with a social ranking of a 6, and so on. But all the social climbing and using girls for beards came to an end when I fell in love with a boy named Chuck in my junior year of high school. Because Chuck and I were teenagers, and our hormones were raging, and it was titillating to do so, we wrote each other the nastiest of carnal love letters to each other. You know, to keep ourselves tided over until we could physically touch each other again during sleepovers at each other's parents' houses, or sneakaways in my childhood treehouse, or makeout sessions in my car on Glendora Mountain Road. I kept those slutty love letters folded and rolled up in my clean socks in my sock drawer. I thought my smart and snoopy mother would surely not look in my clean sock drawer. I mean, no one ever needs touch a teenage boy's socks if one doesn't need to, you know? Well, Mom, it turns out, went through everything. She obviously felt she had to due to our combined experiences, some I have already mentioned, during her brood-rearing years. Or maybe it was her ESP or her mother's intuition that made her ferret through my drawers. In any way, she did find those disgusting pornographic letters that Chuck had written to me, and then she was very shocked. Thinking back on it, Where was my mom's intuition and ESP when I smoked cigarettes and smoked pot and skipped school and made fake IDs and I drove to discos in the middle of the night? She never found out about all those things. But she sure was shocked and angry about those letters she found. She was deeply mad. I think she was maddest about the fact that I was ruining her vision of what she planned for her older son, me marrying a wife who was a woman who would bore me evil secret-keeping children. You know what? I'm going to wrap up this episode now. I promise you the next episode is going to be about my mother. But I really wanted to show you or tell you how my mother became my mother because of the way I was and the way I did things. And the next episode's full of regrets, my regrets, and about what my mother did to me and what I did to her. It was maniacal and horrible and despicable on both sides, I think. And it made us who we were. And that's the way life goes. So thank you for listening to this episode. Listen next week and I'll tell you more about my mother. Thanks for listening. New episodes drop most every Monday. To know more about me, Jon-David, or read my books, as well as listen to the podcast episodes of Mafia Hairdresser, The Glow Stick Gods, Jon-David and Goliath, or more episodes of How I Killed My Mother, just go to mafiahairdresser.com.